So, good morning, everyone. We are very excited and honored to be here today. I would like to start by setting our intention and framing the task at hand for this community. To illustrate, let me introduce Alistair, the Planning Director of Creative Scotland. Alistair faces the daily challenge of transforming ambitious visions and long-term goals into concrete actions and results. Similarly, in this event, we are dealing with an even broader range of issues and scope.
Thank you, and good morning. And if I can in turn briefly introduce Sylvie. She's worked throughout her career to turn great ambitions into reality. First working as an actress and theatre maker, she is noticeably much more comfortable on this stage than I am. Then turning to the difficult task of regional integration in Central America, a journey that included 7 years as Minister for Culture and Youth in Costa Rica.
So yesterday, many ideas were discussed, and today we want to convey you to focus on pragmatic duty. Big ideas need actionable steps that lead to commitments we can uphold and honor. That means bites that we can somehow chew. Reality is often more complex, systemic, intertwined, and nuanced than we visualize. We are part of this complexity, and we are always part of the forces at play.
Okay, so yesterday we took the themes of the summit and we exploded them out. That was the purpose of the day. We covered a lot of ground in our discussions. I'm sure you felt that. We won't seek to retread all of that ground here in the 15 minutes that we have. Instead, I'll focus on 3 things that resonated for me, and I'll share quickly something that surprised me. So subjective and partial, and you will all have your own subjective and partial takes. Firstly, AI and technology more broadly. Obviously, we addressed AI head-on throughout the day in various dedicated sessions. What I found striking was how quickly technology actually surfaced in conversations that were not on the face of it about AI or technology. It feels to me that the speed and complexity of technological advancements are weighing heavily on the group collectively. And the speed of change, what Alexandra Santhaki called a rush forward, an avalanche of information, platforms and tools, is something that is highly disorientating. And in our opening discussion, Michael Runningwolf helped us, I think, to locate some of that unease. In some sense, AI is not really about AI or even about the ownership of content, but actually about sovereignty and the threat of colonization of authentic cultural spaces. And that was mirrored later in the day. One rapporteur at the end of the World Cafe event said, you could take away AI as an issue, and what you have left is inequality. I think in particular, Michael's analogy of data harvesting to the seeding of indigenous land did hit hard, and that was apparent in the conversations I had with people in the break after that first session. But specifically, the appeal made by elites that both data and land needed to be taken for the broader success of humanity. That opening discussion, though, also offered us hope, I think, tangible strategies for action. So Ayeon Kim's highly collaborative approach in working with technologists to develop work, producing hybrid knowledge, exploring identity in the virtual space, engaging directly with AI. And as well as that, Michael's model for contracting with communities on data ownership and ensuring that consent is carefully renegotiated. That certainly struck a chord with a lot of people I spoke to. Secondly, throughout the day, I heard rich debate on how we should understand the value of culture. I guess in a forum like this, we will always return to that when we come together, but it felt like there were some fresh perspectives and views here. And we heard Yari Kamara's take on the increase in the economic framing of culture in Africa and the need to ensure that that doesn't lead to disenfranchisement of any part or of entire populations. And that included some models of grassroots cultural activity I think we can look to. And Yari asked, what guardrails do we need to ensure there is a balance in cultural policy making between the social and economic imperatives? What resolution is there between the two? How can each keep space for each other? And interestingly, also mentioned a potential trajectory towards cultural trade wars as we continue to go down that economic route. Mr. Park similarly highlighted the need to safeguard social and human impacts as culture, in his words, inevitably further commercialized. And Marcia Rolenberg set out Brazil's living cultural policy. So more talking about social outcomes, co-produced with civil society and other stakeholders, with culture and creativity absolutely considered as drivers of social development. And I won't say too much about that because I know Sylvie's going to pick up more, but it did strike me where are the possibilities for making that case for value across all of those dimensions. Thirdly, discussions of cultural rights, again, a perennial topic, I'm sure, but specifically how consistently cultural rights were cited as the mechanism by which we can anchor ourselves and provide resistance to homogeneity, resistance to polarization in society. And in the panel session, we were asked to renew our focus on cultural rights. We were warned against detaching cultural rights from a broader human rights framework. And Marcia spoke about the importance of the common good, and that also providing us a platform for resistance. And within that, what are we talking about when we talk about resistance? Alexandra asked us to resist the war on diversity and the need to stand against the bullying of difference. And we discussed that resistance elsewhere in a lot of the sessions, in the cafe events, and in the afternoon sessions. And maybe I'll take you to one session in particular that I felt was important. Colleagues spoke passionately about what deep societal polarization meant for them in practice. And that meant for them as culture funders, in the work they do with artists, in engaging with civil society, but also as cultural workers, as individuals engaged in this work. Contributions in that session were passionate, they were brave. It was a difficult conversation in the best sense of that word, in the best sense of it being difficult. We were reminded of the fallacy of the Global South being viewed as the location for polarized and populist viewpoints in society. And again, the speed that things are moving came up in that session. Speed at which issues are quickly escalated, entrenched positions are quickly adopted. And we were asked some questions I don't think any of us could answer. We were asked when avoiding controversy and confrontation becomes censorship by proxy. And we were asked what to make of the threat of individuals who, like many of us, I'm sure, are feeling alienated from society and reacting from a place of distrust of mainstream societal norms. Are we really resisting those people? Are we to put up resistance against them? Or is the answer more lying in reconciliation and renewal and in finding those safe mechanisms and those safe spaces to bring polarized opinions together. So I said also, as well as those 3 points, I'd mention a surprise. Super quickly, I heard less than I thought I would about the climate emergency, which is one of the things I work on day to day at home. We heard climate was an example of where multilateralism had failed, that AI burns a lot of carbon, that indigenous culture can offer as examples and route maps with which to address climate. But it felt that maybe we were addressing the role of culture in climate change obliquely and from an angle. And that's with the caveat that we did not get around by any means all of the sessions. So I'll hand over to Sylvie.
Regarding all of that, what assets do we have to move forward? What is the size or strength of our teeth, hence to bite? Not only advocating or advocating for ideas in the next forum or with another big institution, we invite you to adopt a first-person approach. What can we do? What can I do? We heard very specific, we heard yesterday and during the inauguration from authorities and agents from Korea stating that they want to be more present and sharing as partners with their experiences, ideas, and ways. We heard very specific, potent local experiences and initiatives, growing, surviving, or thriving like a cedar through sandstone, sometimes with a lot of scarcity, but building forms of strength and ways of doing that are not always spoken. We have the regular and constant work and dialogue capacity of IFACA and your colleagues here. So with all of that, how much can we influence? What is our sphere of influence? Yesterday, you visualized the future 20 years, 25 years ahead. 25 years ago, groups of institutions, experts, activists, civil society were working in the MDGs, then the SDGs, and also in building the path towards the Convention of Diversity of Expression from 2005. We still don't have an SDG. We have a convention. That means sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. Are there lessons of participation, co-creation, strategic thinking, governance that we can recover from these experiences regarding the future battles we have ahead? Cultural rights affirmation, EA considerations, and so on. To conclude, we invite you to bring more light and inspiration from the nature, culture, relationship, and metaphors we already have. The cedar tree growing through sandstone? Are there other plants that thrive in extreme or unique conditions and ecosystems that can describe your intent, your work, and give us ideas on how to strategize to be stronger? Heavy extractivism is not new. It happens regarding oil, transgenic agriculture, and now contents, data, patterns, authorship. Between that heavy mindset and a sensitive, responsible, more bottom-top approach, we have a spectrum of ways and responses. Can we explore how the extractivism challenge is being addressed in those other situations? And finally, when we think about nature and biodiversity, we talk very clearly about intrinsic, social, economic, aesthetic, cultural, ethical values. All of them. The tendency to be binary, intrinsic value versus economic value or versus social value, is not as strong as sometimes it is when we talk about cultural and cultural diversity. We know nature is our home, that we are part of it, that we need nature also as a resource, and that we have to work with strong tensions regarding monetizing, privatization, and other economical realities. but we think of all those dimensions more simultaneously, more like a system, a complexity we have to balance. Maybe we need to explore also that so we can bridge with other agendas and not and transcending our loneliness sometimes to advocate for our interests. That would be what we prepare for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다.
Pleased to meet you. Did you have a nice rest? I would like to take this opportunity to moderate the first conversation of the day. I am Chun Byung-guk of ARCO. We are living in an era where technology is developing very quickly. This rapid development and innovation of technology is opening new possibilities for artists, but at the same time, accessibility and literacy becomes another task at hand. At ARCO, we are working to support the arts and culture communities so that they can proactively respond to these changes. As I have introduced during my opening remarks, we have APE Camp. We invite developers, artists, youth, so that they can experiment with creativity. It's a hackathon, and we have created this hackathon for the last 4 years. We hope to build capacity for future artists and also create a creative ecosystem, bringing down the barrier between art and industry. We are here at day 2 of the summit, and we are now going to open conversation 2. During the first conversation, we took a look at the topic of resistance, resilience, response, and renewal. We had invited artist Kim Ah-young and architect Michael Running Wolf to participate in the first conversation. The first conversation talked about how we continue to have our unique narratives and also to maintain the sovereignty of artists despite the development of AI. We had a very in-depth dialogue. And subsequently, in conversation 2, we will be discussing sustaining diverse narratives in the technology revolution. We are going to take a look at how diverse narratives can be sustained and connected and expanded. We, at this era, are looking at the fact that AI and digital technologies are not only impacting art and culture, but our society overall. We are at a critical transformation point. Amid such changes, let us take a look at how technology can meet art and how we're going to deal with issues of ethics and tradition in this era. I look forward to all of us gathering our wisdom. Let me introduce our speakers for the conversation. They are from different sectors and different cultures, but both of them continue to work with new communication and connection amidst different technologies. The first speaker is Pooja Sood, founding member and director of Koj International Artist Association. Sood works in Delhi and especially in visual arts in South Asia. Director Sood is working with alternative art networks to experiment with visual art and new technologies, especially establishing a cooperative network in South Asia for experimental art and also promoting dynamic conversations and connections among artists in South Asia. 48 degrees Celsius is the festival that Director Sood directs as an art director to experiment the connection of art and nature. Furthermore, under the Indian government, Jawaharlal Kala Kamarat is where the Director Sood serves as the Secretary General to connect nature, technology, and art. The second speaker is Gerfried Stocker.
So a director is a media artist and at the same time an engineer for communication technology. In 1995, in his early 30s, went to Australia, Lindsay. Arts Electronica was a organization that he became a director of, and for the last 30 years has been setting the direction for this arts organization. Now, Director Stocker has been engaged in Arts Electronica and for providing a design direction for the exhibitions and also moving across arts and technology. Arts Electronica Future Lab was led by his leadership as well for the establishment. And the Director Stocker is looking at humans, technology, and arts, and looking at the cross-section of 3 different dimensions in order to expand the realm of imagination. He is also establishing a platform for convergence of arts and technology. And Arts Electronica and Future Lab are also the organizations that are most favored by APE Camp participants as a research trip place. So that has been a great opportunity for our young people to have learned from Mr. Stocker. In terms of preserving art and culture, and also the rights of art and culture are being redefined, especially Director Stocker's leadership would be a great opportunity for us to focus our work on the artistic practice, who has been leading the scene. Now, with these 2 leaders, especially at a time when technology is becoming a domineering force in society, we will now look at how we can preserve our artistic practice and narratives against this backdrop of technology development. Our 2 panelists have been given questions in advance, and based on which we will be having a conversation and we'll be asking questions to one another. In order to ensure smooth communication between the 2 panelists, since we have many questions that have been prepared, and there are some questions that are overlapping as well, so you can be flexible in having this conversation with each other. I look forward to your communication and conversation. Well, shall
Let's
we?
start.
All right. As we live through profound global changes of our times, what is and should be the role of artificial intelligence in how we tell stories? Okay, so yes, as we've heard all of yesterday, of course, artificial intelligence helps, augmenting human creativity. It's personalizing the narrative experience. It's also amplifying bias and homogenization. And it's also being used in restorative ways, as we heard in the panel yesterday, about language, etc. But what is it? I think what we need to ask is, what is it that AI is actually doing? And what is the possibilities? What are its needs?
who is it for, etc. Or what if you don't have the internet? And in many parts of our world, in South Asia, and I speak from my experience, you not only don't have the internet, but you have government shutdowns. Then what happens? I have to, and I will say that I speak from my experience, and I'd like to tell you as a curator. And there was this during a recent shutdown, in a very profound time in India. There was this young artists who started something called the Inqilab Network. Inqilab means resistance. And it was an open, portable, community-run local area Wi-Fi network that traveled to various public protests in a backpack at that point. And it was created around a time when there was these internet shutdowns, and it operated independently of the internet. Since I'm not a tech person, I'm going to read out. It was hosted freely. Its servers was located on a single board computer that could be charged on the go with a mobile power bank. It broadcast an open Wi-Fi signal up to 50 meters around its vicinity. And it's in those ways that I'd like to say that whereas artificial intelligence is this big word that we are talking about, from our part of the world, we're also being able to tell very important stories with very low tech.
Just a question again. The role of artificial intelligence in how we tell stories. And I allow myself to criticize the question just right from the start, because I think we are too much obsessed by this maniac and this hype about artificial intelligence. I think, first of all, we should ask ourselves, what should be the role of artificial intelligence in our world, in our life, in our society? And maybe then we immediately recognize that in the world of arts and culture, where we come from, it's actually not so different. And I think, even if it sounds very simple and maybe banal, but the real question is not what artificial intelligence can do, but what we want to do with it. This is a very simple, I think, approach, but it's a really profound approach for our situation. And let's go with the next question.
Sure.
I mean, we have a big stack here, so time is running.
Oh, wow.
What is it? It's the surprise question.
Do we have the tools we need? What are they, and where are they, and can we access them? And who can't access them?
I think this connects perfectly with what you just said. And we talk so much about diversity here. And then we see, maybe one of the biggest diversities in a negative sense at the moment is really the question, who has access? One part of the world we talk about who is in control of these technologies. This is typically, say, in countries like Austria and in Europe, where so much of technology is available. But then we have so many people who are struggling even to get access and who have to become super creative. So yes, we have the tools, but they are very uneven distributed. And I think we really have to work hard on not increasing this kind of diversity, which is the social gap, which is the education gap, and the gap of having access to technology.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that, in India, at least, and I speak for India, we have 850 million internet users. But how many of them? That's only 50% that have access to the internet. And beyond that, to artificial intelligence, which is so expensive.
Yeah,
I mean, really expensive.
Because you mentioned this number, there is also another very interesting number. The number of people who don't have access to internet is since 20 years almost the same as the number of people who don't have access to fresh and clean water on a daily basis. And I think this tells us very much. And when you look at the countries who have, super broadband and all the technical equipment, you go through the list of the statistics and you see the countries that you expect, rich countries. And when you go at the end of this list, of course, we also see what we are expecting. And what we see with this, of course, is that technology on its own is not changing anything. It depends on us if we are able and willing to change something.
Well, I also feel that technology, it's not some technical stuff happening there, but it really does impact our society, and it has politics. And as I have mentioned in some of the forums yesterday, it really has a huge impact on our environment. I mean, we know of these large data banks that are being put up all over the world. But in India, they've also started doing that in an area where actually in a state which is very poor. And the way they've put it up is that anyway, there's a shortage of water. And for all the amount of cooling that is required, people who don't even have access to proper drinking water. So what is really technology doing to our social, environmental, and political situation? So I think we also have to look at technology not as some technical thing happening there, but how it impacts the larger scenario.
I think it's even, one of the biggest mistakes that also we in culture, many journalists are constantly making. We always talk about that technology. And also the artificial intelligence. And usually really look at people when they talk about the technology. Most of the time, we make some body gesture that is like, putting it away from us, as if this would be something we are not connected, we are not responsible to. No technology, in particular not artificial intelligence, is brought by aliens flying over the earth and dropping this technology to punish us. We have created it. So this means responsibility, but this also means super opportunity, because we can be in charge. It won't be easy, but it's possible.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's go to the next one.
Yes. Oh, wow. What is and should the role of government be in sustaining diverse narratives in an age of rapid technological change? Oh, God.
This is really a super interesting question. I come from Europe. These are countries where we have a strong belief in our government, and at least some part of Europe. And when we discuss this, immediately we agree on, yes, the government has to take care, has to come up with rules. We have this really wonderful European Commission in Brussels. They are trailblazers in drafting legislation to govern the digital space. But the moment, I only talk with somebody who grew up like in former Eastern Germany, in the East Bloc, as we say. They have a completely different opinion about it. And when I say, the government should take care, and I did this once where people from Iran were also in the conference.
Oh, wow.
I was saying, yeah, government, we need this, the public, and we, the people, have to. And they had a pretty different idea about it. And
well, I would say the same. I think government legislation is necessary because they're the only ones who can actually provide safety if they wish to. But we've just passed the Digital India Act in 2025, actually. And it took about 52 minutes for it to be passed in Parliament without enough discussion. And there have been a lot of whereas it's extremely progressive, and looks at cybersecurity and all the various aspects, but it also impinges on personal and private privacy laws. And I think we need to think about that. But having said that, it's something that I read yesterday. Of course, the government can do what it needs to, but I'm sure these artists. I just read about the brainchild of founder Jordan Mayer and the artist Holly Henderson and May Dayhurst, which they created a software called Spawning, which introduces a consent layer to the internet by giving users the possibility to opt out from their data, which is being used. And I think that if artists can do that and create things and make it business, I think they put it out there for people to use, where you can actually say that I don't want my data to be used for training. I was quite fascinated by that.
I can brag a little bit because they got a big prize at Ars Electronica recently. And the concept is so nice. It sounds so great, just opt out. But what does it help you if you opt out if nobody respects it? And this is again where I think government comes into place. Of course, we have many bad governments on this planet. That's a problem on its own. But considering we have a somehow functioning government, it's the only way how to regulate. And without regulation, also business will not thrive.
Yeah.
I mean, this era that we have right now, like the cowboys, in Wild West, and who pulls the gun faster wins, this is no longer working. To make a really sustainable business, no matter in which area, we need a trustworthy system, and that's something, of course, that governments have to take care of. We cannot
Well, I believe
avoid
it
this.
is happening in the UK. I believe they have a very important legislation on AI coming up.
Yeah.
And of course, the States, I don't know about.
It even happened in the States
Yes,
until
until-
Mr. Trump started, because he, on the first day, he reversed all the regulations that had already been in place.
Yeah.
And that's, of course,
Wow.
not so nice.
What are the new ways innovation and diversity are evolving? And which examples or case studies, in your view, highlight this transformation? So,
There are no new ways how innovation happens. Innovation always, probably since 200,000 years, since we run around as Homo sapiens on this planet, happens because of the same things. We have problems and we need to solve them. Technology is one of the strongest, best, and most successful ways of how we humans have started to solve our problems. And the second thing is curiosity. And the third thing is being courageous, being brave, being crazy enough to be the next entrepreneur or the next innovator or the next creative person. That's always how innovation comes into our world. And that's why it's so important to see the role of arts and culture.
Yeah.
Because this is the soil where innovation grows.
I agree with you. And I think in talking from my perspective, I think innovation is seen very much in the R&D of companies, whereas, and we try very hard to kind of explain the importance of artists. And if we could put artists to work with technical companies or with the IITs, the Indian Institute of Technology, I mean, they're still open, but they're so focused on the next big thing that they have to do, or the training of students. So I think it's really important for artists, for us as mediators, as institutions or as curators, try and build that gap. And I think that's something that we're trying to do at COGE, where we've started a range of programs for artists who wish to work in technology, but also to build those networks, which are so fragile and actually quite non-existent. So how do you make that happen is really an important part.
I mean, at least in some countries, we see a growing awareness that only if you nurture this very basic element, this ecosystem of creativity, that you can expect also to exploit it. Still in many places, unfortunately, we see this idea creativity is like, this new raw material, this resource for everything, and let's just take creativity.
Yeah.
But creativity is not something that you can dig out of the ground like coal or iron ore or something. You have to constantly nurture it. And I think this is the environment we are living in. And it's really great to see that technology suddenly has become such a big buzzword in the cultural world. It's a surprise one.
Well, how are traditional models being challenged by new and alternative ways of thinking and doing?
Radically disruptive, unexpected, and brutal. I think this is really what's the point is the energy with which our traditional concepts and understanding are being challenged when we think of these new technologies. And we always say now artificial intelligence, and it has become like a code word for all this amount of technical developments. But we have to see that artificial intelligence, the way we have it, wouldn't exist without these vast networks, without this vast amount of data that is available, and data that has been contributed, of course, by culture. And I think this is something that we need to consider as a kind of anchor point when we think about these changes of the traditional models. Because it's so easy, and we're so used to say, or to talk about replacement. So a new technology comes and then everybody says this will replace the old thing. It doesn't happen. I mean, photography happened, and well, we still have painting, and it's very successful. The jukebox happened, and the computer happened, and we still have musicians really playing live on stage, like we had also here at the opening. So the point is rather to find ways how to have these things going into each other, respecting each other, and learning from each other. And I think that's, again, one of the things where art and culture plays a very vital role, because we can provide, so to say, the glue that helps to bring the things together.
And I think artists really don't care about using only new technology. It's really about what they want to say and what is the medium that is best used for that. So whether it's video, or whether it's new technologies, AI, or it's just, you know, low tech and old medium. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah. I think we have to speed up.
All right.
Look at this number of questions. How long do we have time?
Okay, how can we enhance collaboration between the cultural sector and non-cultural sectors to address the imbalance in skills, knowledge, and resources required to work in the digital age?
So in short, the
think we
question
sort
is
of
like, how can we save the planet?
Well, I think we all do it in smaller ways, the way, you know, you do it, we do it in our own ecosystems, trying to support artists or build these collaborations between sectors as best as we can, one at a time, three at a time. But I think the real point here is to actually build these relationships for a period of time. You know, we often do it for a project. I mean, I know in India, that's the way, or our part of the world, you would be so relieved if you could actually get that possibility. But can we build those and actually keep those going, not just for artists, but also for publics to understand and to be exposed to stuff like that? And I think it's hard work, because many of us are under-resourced. We're small organizations. We don't have, you know, either the human or the financial resources. But I think you need that very desperately to push some kind of understanding and collaboration.
Yeah. And we have this very ambivalent situation. I mean, on the one side, of course, it is super important that from our cultural sector, we connect with every part of society. Yeah. But then again, we have to maintain what is the special quality of art and culture. If we are not insisting on the unconditional, independent role of art, we lose the value that we can provide to society. And I think this is really one of the biggest challenges that we have right now, also considering the commercial and financial pressure that is building up.
But I do feel that the cultural sector kind of is very hospitable to these convenings. You know, you can bring people together to have conversations, but I agree that you need to constantly reassert that the artist and artwork comes first. Yeah. How can technology contribute positively to dynamic cultural discourse? Can I take this one first? Let me tell you what, and again, I'm going to give you an example, as I will, from of low tech again. So we are, we are located, Khoj, which is the contemporary art space that I run, is located in a mixed neighborhood in Delhi, which has a slew of migrants that come through, whether it's local migrants from different states, or at one stage we had a huge number of migrants from and refugees as well from Africa. And currently, after the Taliban, we have a lot of Afghan migrants. Like every other part of the world, there's a lot of racism that exists. And in our street where we're located, there was a lot of racist slurs that were being sent to, that were being used for some of the African population. We were really, we didn't know what to do, because we lived there. There is a sense of trust that we built. And so we started a series of residencies, which is what we do between India and African artists, saying, okay, what is our relationship through the Indian Ocean, etc. One of the artists decided that she wanted to work in the community, and she set up a phone recharge shop. In India, you have, very little money, 10 rupees and 20 rupees prepaid cards, SIM cards that are charged so you can make your phone calls. And she set this up and she kept waiting 3 days a week. She would wait and people would come. And finally, some people started coming. And there was when the Indian person would come, she would put quietly some really great Congo music and, African music on it and give it back. And when an African would come, she would put some Bhojpuri and Indian music on it and give it to them. And they would come back and say, "But what is this? Who are you? What's going on? Why did you do this? Do you like it? What do you think about it?" And it was slowly, over almost 6 months, this was a long-term project, it ended up being a conversation space. It became a little recording studio, this tiny little place where they began to have conversations. And it was through this very simple act of exchange through very low technology of the mobile phone, that there were conversations that were brokered. At least they began to talk to each other. And at one stage, I think it was Congo and India, on 15th of December is when we had 15th of August is Independence Day, and we were all holding flags. And they said, "Why do you hold a flag? And what is this?" And hence the conversations and respect for difference, possibly, that began. And so even if you can effect it through these very interesting artistic strategies in a small area, I think that is meaningful.
Yeah, that's why I think we really have to rephrase this question. Very important. It's not about how technology can contribute to cultural discourse. Our question should be, and the power of our positions is, how can we, with culture, how can artists with their projects contribute to a positively dynamic technical discourse? Because the technical discourse is the one that has to change. And I really like this. It's a wonderful example because it has this lightness of little subversion, but it's really focused on human being. And I have to counter, of course, with another example from my world. There is a wonderful young artist in Berlin who is really working about, how does technology impact our society, our life. And he did this wonderful project. You might have heard about it. He put 99 smartphones in a little carriage and went with this carriage up the street, down the street, up the street for 20 minutes or something. And the super intelligent algorithms of Google Maps totally freaked out. Oh my God, there has to be a massive traffic jam in the street because the same cell phones are stuck there for more than 20 minutes. And immediately the street got, this bright red color. And the people living there had a very nice afternoon. I think it's very often this lightness in not only having fun with technology, but also making fun of technology. And this is an important contribution because it helps us to lose our, we are often so afraid and impressed by technology. And that's not necessary.
It is a critical approach to technology and really seeing what it does and what it cannot do. And I think that's a fantastic example. Must bring them to India.
Oh God, this is a long one.
Oh, wow. How can we address the blurred lines between human and machine-generated knowledge in the future? And should we establish mechanisms to certify human-generated knowledge, or should we embrace a more integrated approach that acknowledges and values contributions from both humans and machines? You answer that. This is huge.
Yes. I think that would be the best answer. I mean, I think this blurring the lines between human and machine-generated thing, this is a discussion that is very much our problem right now. But just imagine in a few years when it is totally normal that everybody not only can download any type of content, music, images from the internet, but you can generate it on your own. I mean, guess what will be really appreciable for us? What will we consider to be special? Just another result from the machine, or some result that might be even not as perfect, but it is coming from you, or from another human person. So I think we should be much more relaxed about this. This whole discussion whether AI will replace art and artists, I think this is not really going to the point. It doesn't mean that there will be a very massive shakeup of the ecosystem and the business models of art and culture and creativity. But the core of it, I mean, I think there are not really artists on this planet ever who make art only for making money. Making art and also consuming art is something that goes much, much deeper, is much, much deeper rooted in us as humans.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not concerned at all about this.
It is a basic need, isn't it? Okay.
The next one is yours.
What comes to mind in the context of your practice and concerns when you hear resistance, resilience, response, renewal?
That's perfect for you.
Mhm. Well, I think for us, it's really about trying to stay as a small organization with limited resources to really continuously remain the incubation space that we are. To pivot when we don't have money, but continuously support and keep the artist at the center. And that's what we've done for the last 28 years through various strategies. During COVID, we just said, okay, we tried to do other kinds of stuff. But I think at the center of everything, it's really the artist first. And I think when you do that, the rest of it falls into place.
I think in particular resilience is very much connected again with diversity. I mean, to be able to respond to threats and pressure of our time, and even more so of coming threats, we need to have a broad armor. We have to have many weapons, many tools, many ideas. And this only happens if we allow for free open spaces where ideas and inspiration just can grow. Also the ones that will not be successful, also the ones that we might not like. We only will know afterwards which are the valuable ones.
Yeah, and I think it's also a space for failure to happen. If you allow that possibility, is when I think artists feel safe to be able to do whatever they wish. And I think that's really valuable. And that's something that we hold on to. Because if we ask artists to take risks, with practice, say we must experiment, what about institutions? I think we need to take that risk along with the artists.
What we should learn from artists.
Yes.
Because they are really the professional risk takers of our society.
How can we leverage emerging technologies and digital platforms to democratize access to knowledge? Yours.
I mean, on the first hand, this looks like a kind of contradiction because we are so much used now to think about these new technologies as something that is damaging democracy. But it's actually not the dynamics of the technology. It's just the dynamics of how these technologies are being implemented right now in our society. This is threatening our democracy. I mean, in particular, threatening our democracy, the way how it's implemented and endangering it. The way how this technology works is completely contrary. And we might very often, laugh about so much stupid content on social media and all these nice influencers doing blah, blah, blah on the web. But I mean, that's also a kind of democracy. I mean, democracy, access to communication is not necessarily connected to a kind of academic or elitist content. It's about access. And I think it's something that as societies on our planet, we are also more and more learning. And I think the pressure that democracy is now facing because of manipulation in social media and on the internet is super dangerous, and we must not underestimate it. But maybe it's also a good wake-up call for us. I'm very sure, coming back to resilience, that our societies will recognize that this is not really the best way to use this technology. And again, I think it starts in the institutions that we are representing. It starts in the institution of culture, of education, where we are used to critical thinking. And this critical thinking is the only way how we can leverage the technologies for democracy, for society, for culture, by being able to use this technology in a competent and qualified way. Take it back in our hands, basically.
take it back in our hands and somehow share that critique to a larger public. Because I think many of us fall prey to what is going on without really understanding what it's doing to us socially and politically. You know, and this reminds me of an art project which a duo in India did, Nayantara and her partner, and they did one day of political advertisements on Facebook, and it was live, and it just showed, you know, with the complex algorithms, what was happening in the run up to some elections and what was the kind of messaging we were getting, you know, through that one day. And it was live streamed. Of course, they did it very beautifully, and you realize what is happening to us, you know. And I think through that art project, with, you know, just the fact that you can expose many more people to saying that, you know, it's the algorithm and what it's doing to you, I think it's very important.
Creating this awareness and also creating, so to say, prototypic situations that prove that something is different. And this brings to my mind this wonderful project in Tokyo, in Japan. There is a robot cafe in Tokyo. And of course, I think everybody, when you hear robots in Tokyo, you just think about high-tech and fancy robots serving and preparing the coffee. And actually, that's right. You go there and you see a lot of robots on every table, and the barista is a robot. But the really interesting thing, and this is why, only because it has been made by artists. These robots are controlled by humans who are, because of some problems, sickness, or whatsoever, are not able to participate in the social life, who are not able to work. And robots not being used to replace people, which is the general narrative of robotics, but robots being used to support people. And it's so simple. It just can make the difference, and suddenly technology is a way to leverage our society, our democracy.
Yeah, that's the positive bit. But there's also the flip side when you think of the labor that goes in, and much of that labor is in our part of the world, in the more developing countries, where they are the labor that is sitting there at very almost negligible payment, actually, you know, feeding in data, collecting data, putting it all in, and it's being used by many of us here. So there is also that flip side of labor, you know, which of course the artist has used beautifully to manifest a positive thing and to talk about the lack of, you know, the ability, but also to keep in mind what it does to, because, you know, you have to think of the social reality that we're really working in.
I think that's very important again for our sector, because who else would, you know, dare to take the energy to also write and tell these stories of technology? Because daily, every, you know, news program we see, every blog we see, or every podcast we listen is basically about the merits of technology. And I mean, I'm an engineer. I really like technology, and it's wonderful. It's one of the best things that humans are doing. But it's about a narrative. Is it just a narrative that the big companies who use it for profit making are telling us, or is it a narrative of people who are exposed to technology, who suffer because of very bad working conditions? And there are plenty of stories. And I think without many of these very great critical art projects and art initiatives, probably we wouldn't know about many of them.
Yeah, for example, you know, we have this, the gig economy, which exists everywhere in the world now, but we have this particular app called Blinkit in India, Zepto, Blinkit, which means that you can get anything from a matchbox to a refrigerator in 10 minutes at your doorstep. 10 minutes. And it happens. You could be in your kitchen wanting peanuts and it would come to your doorstep. But what is it actually doing? It's an app, convenience to you, me, and everyone else. But one has seen the frenzy with which these young delivery people have to run around to get to you in those 8 to 10 minutes, because Blinkit will tell you it will be with you in 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. What is it really doing to them? And you just imagine that there's hardly any payment for that. And what is it really doing to their psyche, to their lives?
And how easy it can be, you know, that we stop to make the difference between the technical system and the people are delivering. And suddenly we see these people only anymore as part, like another, a wheel in this big machine. So really to make sure that we keep up this perspective of humanity.
And there are artists who've now begun to make work on the gig economy, to question it, and to look at the labor that is happening. And so we're very excited to be supporting some of those projects.
Ayung Kim, the artist who was on stage here yesterday, she made a wonderful project about this.
This is for you. When is technology at its best, which you've spoken about, in fostering creative innovation, play and experimentation? And when is it at its worst?
Oh God, I think we have had already some very nice example. I think it's always at its best when it's used in a good way, when we see that in projects or examples where people are not just using it the way how it is sold to us. And when we take it apart, when we reconfigure it, and when we can use it as a kind of looking glass into new possibilities. I think this is where technology actually is at its best in the creative sector.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other areas. I mean, I think it's not bad if robots take over some, nasty jobs which are very heavy and dangerous and things like this. So there are plenty of good examples. But I think in our context, the very important point is, of course, technology is only good as long as it's supporting and enhancing and supporting the humans and the
If
users.
I can give an example, we supported a project which I think also previewed a small part at Ars Electronica by Puneet Jain and Jessica Duarte. And it was called Reimagining Waiting for Hands, a take on Waiting for Godot, reimagining bodies in XR and for people with disabilities. And, it was really looking at the fact that Apple, with the VR sets, you suddenly see people pinching, dotting, etc. And of course, Apple refers to this as the dawn of an era in spatial computing. But it reveals how big tech companies like Apple and Meta are cementing an ableist norms, and excluding those whose bodies deviate from that. And the artists then really created a performance piece, but in extended reality, where two people would sit across each other and tried to reimagine their bodies in a virtual space with mouth gestures and breathing, thoracic. And it was fascinating to see them really kind of hack this and say that we're not going to talk about what is being seen as this great achievement, but actually look at what it's not doing. It's not allowing for disabled bodies to be able to think in a particular way. And I think that to me was what good artists everywhere, where they really are able to rethink and question technology in interesting ways.
And show things that the technology could do if we just would dare.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, this artist constantly ringing the bell and say, hey, wake up, do the right thing with technology. I think this is really a very important role in our contemporary culture.
Whereas a lot of this, because we'd gone to the IIT, the Hive lab there, I mean, all the car companies too are giving a lot of money to do research to be able to see it with the eyes, a driverless car, etc. But how come they're not thinking about it for the disabled? I mean, it's pretty much similar technologies, but they're not thinking that.
Okay.
We have
giving us
minutes.
a warning. Well, I think 2 more hours and we have all the questions.
Yeah, so I think we can just do a few. Okay. Which one would you like to say? Oh, we've done this. Democratize. What strategies can be implemented to navigate the ethical challenges posed by new technologies in terms of rights ownership and preservation of living cultural expressions? Well, I think that's something that's been discussed a lot yesterday, in terms of indigenous voices, languages that are being lost, and how We need to have community knowledge bases that need to be by the community and for the community. So I think that's one of the things that was discussed a lot yesterday. And I think I agree, because there are many stories that are being lost in our part of the world. I won't talk about the indigenous, but for example, partition in India in 1947 was a horrible incident, to say, an event that happened. And there is a partition museum in India, and I'm sure if there was a partition museum in Pakistan, we would tell radically different stories. However, there's a very interesting People's Partition archive that has been put up by a group of young people. And it tells real stories by people who've lived through partition, many of them now not living, but also who are have the generations. Myself, my parents came from Pakistan during partition, and I think for me to have those real life stories and to be able to share them and understand what happened, where we were both perpetrator and victim. And so you can't tell the story in one way. But if you go to the Partition Museum, which is set up by the government, we were always the victim. We were never the perpetrators. And so I think it also tells real stories because you're talking to people, but it also validates people's experiences and stories, which we all need in our lives.
And I think when it comes to these ethical challenges, of course, very much has to do with the impression that we have that all these AI systems that are now so dominant, they are totally under control of the big companies. The ones that you read of every day in the newspapers, yes, they are. But just recently I got the statistics where they said that 2/3 of the large language models that are out there right now are open source systems. And open source is really a very powerful, even a weapon. I mean, think about what, the big stir up that happened when DeepSeek was published and how the Chinese are now putting all their systems open source. Not so much, I think, because they are so friendly and want to give away everything, but they knew that's the best way how to defeat the monopolies. And there are some really exciting projects going on. 2 years ago, we could give an award to Masakane, a project coming out of Africa that works together with scientists in the US, in Europe, in other Asian countries. And it's all about how to bring the more than 2,000 languages of Africa into these large language models. This is, of course, something Google and Meta and all those, they will not really care about it. But if we do it, and it's something that communities can do, AI is not a system that is only approachable and accessible to the big companies. It's something that works also open source very well. And I think that's the most important thing. Because only if we introduce ourselves, and in terms of strategies, the most important strategy is, go into it, embrace it, even if it's by far not perfect at the moment.
Well, I have to say this time, I have to say that the government of India has actually done a lot of work in getting the many, many languages in India onto various platforms. And it's kind of leading in that. So that is something that we value because there's Hindi, Telugu, every language that's really come about. So that's been quite interesting.
It's clear that the values that we care about will only end up in this new world if we take care to bring it there. I think this is responsibility of cultural institutions in our time. 7 more minutes.
No more minutes, I think.
No more minutes?
Yeah.
But I think we have to ask the last question.
Okay.
There are the rules of the game. Am I right? So which one was the last?
The last one. What, future-proofing? No, as a art and culture leader. What you're supposed to do. Well,
the future-proofing?
Well, future-proofing is, of course, Should I read that out?
It's a futile idea.
What future-proofing strategies are you imagining within your context and networks?
I mean, I think it's future-proof, it just doesn't exist. I mean, there is no way to future-proof against this thing. There's only one thing: brace for impact. And this means, really take it serious. I mean, it is a powerful technology, and the amount of activities worldwide, the amount of money that is poured in this technology has a dynamic that is just incredible. So we cannot sit it out. We cannot just wait and hope it's going by. Not only because we would lose all the opportunities, but because we just would be left behind. So I think it's really our responsibility, and all the things that we are so often afraid of, AI in terms of, it will take over humanity and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it depends on us. We humans are the ones who use this technology. We will decide upon how to apply this technology. So what we need is we have to work hard, not only on the development of better AI systems, but on the development of better human capability to take the responsibility for this technology that we are now, sending out in all these areas of our
I
world.
also think that, in the cultural sector, it's like we're playing catch up with technology. We're somewhere behind, and we are in many ways. So maybe in our context, at least, I think future proofing would mean a lot of training, a lot of sharing, a lot of digitizing all our archives, because we are. We might be called the majority world, but we are the global south. And I think our stories and our stories need to be put out there and told.
Yeah, and maybe one thing that I always consider very important, we need to be more self-confident. I mean, we people from arts and culture, we come from the most important universe for this future, the universe of storytelling, the universe of people who are ambitious and engaged, the universe of wonderful spaces and places like this where art and culture is happening. This is what is really necessary. The technology will be only a means, a shell for it. But we are in charge for the most important thing, and this is content.
예, 감사합니다.
Very much. Thank you very much for your remarks against the backdrop of working at the front lines. Thank you for sharing with us your life examples, and thank you for that very interesting dialogue. I think we need to give you 2 days for this conversation. Today, through our 2 speakers, we were able to learn about how technology and art are not separated, but rather they are expanding one another. And we also learned about how to leverage and operate technology and art. I hope you enjoyed this very interesting dialogue. And what I was very interested in was the role of the government, because I have served as a member of the National Assembly, and I have the experience of being a lawmaker, and based on the laws that I have enacted, I have had the opportunity to actually execute that law as a minister within the government. Alvin Toffler, a well-known futurist, said, "The speed of change of technology is moving at 100 miles per hour, but politics 30 and lawmaking 1 mile per hour." So in this world where we are seeing exponential growth of technology, it seems that institutions are still in the analog era. The institutions, the laws in the analog era could feel like regulations. And so technology running at 100 miles per hour is being far ahead, and therefore you may feel like laws and regulations are hindering the development of technology. As Director Sood has mentioned, we need to recognize each other's differences. That is very important indeed. We need to recognize that we are different from one another. That is a starting point of creativity. And that is why art is valuable. But such development of technology may unite all of us and unite all of these phenomenon. Some phenomenon may feel like a risk. For example, platforms may create a narrative curated according to the preferences of the users through echo chambers. But this phenomenon is actually leading to a horrific experience of Korea. I don't know if you have heard, but the former president became a slave of the echo chamber. He only listened to one side and he lost the other side. And in the end, he actually declared martial law, and that is leading to his impeachment as well as the presidential election coming right around the corner next week. One of the biggest problems in Korea is this phenomenon dubbed echo chamber. The conservatives and the progressives, they are in an echo chamber. And the YouTubers who are using and manipulating echo chambers are creating thumbnails to link in viewers. And it seems that people are gathering in these echo chambers, leading to very sharp bipolarization of our society. And that is becoming the biggest social and political issue in Korea. So development of technology, depending on how you utilize these technologies, it could be a threat to us, or it could be great opportunities for us. Concerning this topic, we were able to earn answers from our two speakers. Technologies will inevitably continue to develop and change. In the end, as Director Sood has mentioned, we need to remember that art and culture may be catching up, but at the same time, on the flip side, the creative imagination of culture and art is continuing to be supported and caught up by technology. What technology cannot substitute is the creativity of art and culture. And so, through the IFACA World Summit, we are able to discuss this topic, and that is a very important discourse that we need to join. Thank you very much to our two speakers. Another big round of applause for their insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We will now begin the coffee break. Coffee stations are available on the first and second floors of the Arco Arts Theater. For your comfort, additional seating has been specially arranged in the front courtyard of the theater. Enjoy the break and take a moment to connect with fellow delegates.
지금부터 커피 브레이크가 진행됩니다. 아르코예술극장 1층과 2층에 커피 스테이션이 준비되어 있으며 앞마당에도 좌석이 마련되어 있으니 편안한 휴식과 네트워킹의 시간이 되시길 바랍니다.
Dear fellow delegates, the session will begin shortly. Please take your seats and kindly set your mobile phones to silent or vibrate mode. Thank you.
참석자 여러분, 잠시 후 세션이 시작됩니다. 자리에 앉아주시고 휴대전화는 진동 또는 무음으로 설정해 주시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
they had notebooks. Okay. Say that again. They had notebooks. That's good. I brought mine.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming back. My name is Odrama Ochai. I'm the Managing Director for Co-Creation Hub Africa. We're Africa's leading creative and technology ecosystem enabler. This plenary is titled Ethics and Governance of AI in Future-Proofing the Cultural and Creative Sectors. For this plenary, we're talking about something you hear a lot about, but might still feel a bit unsure of: artificial intelligence, AI, or IA, depending on where you're from. Talking about where you're from, I'm sure some of you from global south countries like mine, Nigeria, are wondering, why bother talking about AI when we haven't solved for basic infrastructure like roads or internet or basic education and literacy before we start talking about digital literacy, then AI literacy? Great question. I'll tell you why we must talk about AI. If we don't join the AI conversation now or take action now, other people will decide how our stories get told, how our artists get paid, and how our culture gets represented in this new digital world. So we must be concerned about it. We must be actively involved in thinking about it. And more importantly, we must participate in building it. Otherwise, as we say in Nigeria, we will be sleeping on a bicycle. As you can imagine, sleeping on a bicycle is not really something you want to be doing. Now, ethics and governance. Ethics for me simply means what good looks like in AI. Fairness, inclusion, respect for human creativity, for artist rights, and so on and so forth. Governance, on the other hand, is how we make that goodness stick. So the rules, the regulations, the norms, and the oversight to make sure that these ethics are implemented everywhere and for everyone. Without these two things, AI can amplify bias, erase livelihoods, and narrow culture rather than widen it. Before we start this session and before I introduce my amazing panelists, I want to do a quick pulse check on what you guys think about when you hear the word AI. So first, can you please stand up if, when you think about AI, you immediately think about generative AI tools like ChatGPT, or Gemini, or DALL-E, or DeepSeek? Please stand up if that's what you think about when you think about AI. I don't want you guys falling asleep on me. That's why I'm asking you to. Now, stay standing if, when you hear about AI, you also think about machine learning, the process by which AI systems learn from data. If machine learning doesn't come to your mind when you hear AI, or if you're not sure of the difference between the two terms, or what machine learning even is, please sit down. Don't worry, we won't judge you. We're all here to learn. Finally, remain standing if you also think about algorithms, such as recommender systems on Netflix or Spotify or TikTok or Instagram as being AI. So sit down if you don't know what those things mean, or if it does not come to mind when you think about AI. Okay. So this exercise is important. Actually, you can all sit down now. Thank you. This exercise is important because when we discuss ethics and governance of AI in relation to the cultural and creative sectors, it is essential that we consider the full spectrum of AI technologies. We often only think about generative AI, at least half of the room does, which creates new content like ChatGPT or VO3, which Google released this week, I think. We don't often think about algorithms or recommender systems, which affect how easily audiences discover cultural content on online platforms. We often don't think about machine learning, which analyzes tons of data sets like movie ratings to sort of predict what audiences will enjoy and therefore influence cultural consumption. So each of these areas have distinct ethical and governance considerations that impact creators, artists, cultural diversity, fairness, and inclusivity. To help me discuss these really important topics, I have two experts. The first is Professor Jin-Jun Lee. He's a brilliant artist and educator from Korea who thinks deeply and does a lot of work at the intersection of technology and creativity. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you. And Michaela Mantegna, a phenomenal lawyer and expert from Argentina. She keeps technology companies honest about ethics and fairness. Please give her a round of applause. I'd now like to invite Jin-Jun, Professor Lee, to give us his opening remarks and thoughts on ethics and governance of AI. Over to you, Jin-Jun.
Good morning. I am Jin-Jun Lee. I'm a media artist, and I'm currently working at a MIT version of Korea, which is KAIST, a media lab. I am teaching art and technology at this institute. First off, before I begin my opening remarks, I would like to present a following question to all of you. Is the world in a better place? But are we really living in a better place, since the world has become a better place? The benefits and conveniences that have been brought on by technology, is the world becoming a better place for all? That is the big question that I have in mind, because technology is always making our lives more convenient and giving us comfort and has been used as a tool. But AI and other issues that are arising in recent days, at an unprecedented pace, it is bringing changes to our lives and it is changing us. And I want to ask this question again. Artificial intelligence or AI, is it really a form of intelligence? Unless we develop a certain agenda, or unless we agree on a certain agenda or topic, technology will create that agenda for us or develop the topic for us. That is why the topic at hand is very relevant. And especially what I want to underscore is artists and as creators. How can we approach technology? How can we develop our opinions around the directions for technology development? We're not just artists as people that are embracing technology or just using or utilizing technology. We have to be involved in the development of technology, especially in the process of data creation. And I believe that we have to be actively engaged in the process. As you may be very well know, there is a bias issue in terms of data or Orientalism, the Western views that are actually causing bias in terms of data. And also echo chamber issues, which is a world where the data bias is filled up. We may not be able to wake up, and we may be confronting a big global version of AI. So as we are waking up from such dream, we have to come in solidarity and rethink where we stand. Second issue involves education. Going beyond digital literacy, especially, I want to focus on the importance of art education. In the age of AI, we need to be able to utilize AI, but we have to become critical thinkers and creative thinkers. Perhaps we're losing such competence and capabilities. That is why the importance of education is being emphasized more than ever. And nations, schools, and industries have to come together in a spirit of solidarity to foster such community. Before we can talk about the topic of AI, I believe that these issues have been repeating themselves throughout the course of history. In 1950, Louis Mumford asked the following question. Scientifically, we have become superhumans, but in terms of aesthetics, we're still fools. So that concludes my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jinjun. Over to you, Michaela.
Excuse me, I got used to podium because I'm a university professor. And you know how we are. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. We have the slides. Thank you so very much. So, AI and creative industries seem to be at a deadlock, fighting one against the other. Two opposite forces with similar strength entangled in an impossible knot. It's moving? Yes. And the choices seem binary and excluding. Regulation on one side, innovation on the other. There is no middle ground. Either we protect creative industries or we allow tech industries to scale. We see this clearly framed as copyright versus AI narrative, a zero-sum game where concessions means that both sides lose. In this landscape, ethics is the elephant in the room. AI ethics tries to deal with the devastating side effects of AI progress in a very fragmented way. We talk about bias, misinformation, appropriation, exploitation, as if separate compartments, instead of different expressions of the root problem. And like the parable of the blind man and the elephant, we are each describing only what we can touch. In creative sectors, by narrowing the debate to copyright versus AI, we focus on just one part of the AI ethics elephant. It's a reductionist approach that misses the bigger picture. These issues are deeply interconnected because AI involves not just intellectual property, but other types of data and intellectual labor. For example, think of ghost workers sanitizing the systems that we use so they are not harmful. They are paid $2 an hour and deal with traumatizing images of violence and abuse to make our systems safe. Ethics is a multidimensional problem. We need to consider the ethics of AI in a holistic way that reflects the structural, systemic, and multidimensional nature of the problem. We can continue this tug of war, or we can proverbially cut the rope and get us out of this entanglement. The real challenge is structural. This isn't just about artists. It's about invisible labor, sustainability, the future of water and energy, data extractivism, and along, etc. For artists, it's about consent and attribution. But fundamentally, it is an economic issue, a problem of fair redistribution of wealth. The problem is not that AI is taking our jobs. The problem is that AI is taking our income. So, being a structural problem, licensing alone won't untie the knot. For worse, expanding copyright law risks reinforcing data monopolies. It risks transforming big tech into big AI, because only the biggest players can afford to license everything. So, can answers come from outside the copyright framework? Yes, we can think of taxation and other policy interventions that will also have a beneficial impact on ethical problems. We can think of universal basic income or creative basic income for artists. Because, let's be honest, any licensing money will go straight into the shareholders' pockets and not the cultural workers producing the knowledge. I don't see the New York Times distribute any license money they can get. Do you? The alternative is to think of AI as a public good, open source and transparent, like the replicator machines in Star Trek. Generative AI could be a technology of abundance, allowing us to overcome the scarcity of the physical world. And as food for thought, I will close with my favorite quote from Star Trek, you know, I'm a nerd, that sums up a brighter way to think about the future of technology. The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force of our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Michaela. Michaela talks about the tension between technology or AI and the creative sector. And I know too well about this tension because I support both technology entrepreneurs in my work as well as creative entrepreneurs. It's like having two children who love each other but are always at each other's throats and just never agree on anything as it relates to AI. So we've heard the opening statements from Jinjun and Michaela. I'd like to do another quick exercise, just so you guys don't feel left out. Raise your left hand, please, if your country has any kind of official AI strategy or policy. Raise your left hand.
Kind of in the middle, if it's
Put it here.
maybe.
Now, please raise your right hand if your country actively involves the cultural sector, like artists or museums or creators, in developing that AI strategy. No, keep your left hands up. Also raise your right hand if the creative sector, not a little bit, not so much. I see that it's still mainly left hands. It's no hands and left hands. Now wave your two hands if your AI strategy or policy in your country actively references the cultural and creative sector or rights of artists and creators. I can only see maybe 2% of hands waving. You can put your hands down. There's clearly a problem with that if we're talking about AI, ethics, and governance as it relates to the cultural and creative sectors. Because if we go by the quick poll in the room, very few countries either have AI strategies or policies or have AI strategies and policies that talk about the cultural and creative sector. So from your perspective, Jinjun, with this in mind, as an artist and an educator, how do you think that the cultural and creative sectors can take a more proactive role in shaping ethical AI and the governance of AI through strategies and policies?
저희가
In terms of the role of the traditional artists, I believe it merits our thinking and discussion. So in terms of the traditional roles of artists, is it just about making something? Or is it about exploring unexplored areas as pioneers? We have to actually go beyond the boundaries to expand our roles as artists, and it is high time that we do that, especially in the policy making process or creating data. And in terms of processing, we need to continue to make requests that artists have to be involved in the process. But our asking is not going to get to that actual process happening place. So we have to actually think about the roles of artists as well as the critical thinking, as well as solidarity of artists. And we have to expound upon that to make that request to the entities, especially in terms of data bias. There are different artist groups across the world, and they really have to make strenuous efforts to remove that, because diversity is the most important virtue in artists. So we need to create data that can protect the voices of the minorities and the few. Also, in the process of education, the creativity of artists can be more fully leveraged through the establishment of a critical education, especially not in terms of leveraging AI, but there are, for example, the thinking ability of the humans that may be lost as a result of the use of AI. That is something to be cautioned against. This is, for example, can be linked back to the education programs that focuses a lot on critical thinking. So we have to underscore the fact that that is a very critical virtue, the critical thinking, and education sectors, companies, and the relevant stakeholders have to come together for collaboration. The AI collaborations or the artifacts that are created as a result, we could have a certificate of AI that can give practicality to the values, that we can recognize the value of certain artists. Maybe we have to draw such agreement as well.
That's Jinjun. You talk a lot about education of artists. I think as well that we need a lot of education of cultural institutions and intermediaries that support artists and the creative sector, because that's when we can speak the language of the AI and technology sector. That's when we can engage with our ministries of technology, our ministries of ICT or digital economy, depending on what they're called in our countries. It's that education and understanding of AI that will help us have those conversations that are often had now without us. Without that education, we can't meaningfully engage in those conversations. So thank you for that. Michaela, so you advocate for ethical frameworks in frameworks at global forums. What would you say are the biggest blind spots or overlooked issues in the current AI governance discussions?
Like the hot take.
Yes, hot takes.
Hot take quickly. No, first, I was still thinking about the answer, and I completely agree on the importance of critical thinking and continuing that. Because there are studies and reports coming out, I don't know if you have read about it, on how the effects that generative AI is having in our brains, in our cognition, and how this is creating dependence on this technology. And on this point, before going to your answer, I like to say that first it was intelligence. We thought of artificial intelligence. Then we are debating artificial creativity. And we need to be aware that the next stage of this, where it's coming, this is the one kind of the thing that I do is investigating the trends and try to foresee where it's going, is artificial empathy. And we are going to see manipulation, and we are going to see a growing dependence on these chatbots, on these devices. And this ties into the conversation about the blind spots, because we are kind of like falling into the convenience of using these systems without acknowledging who are the owners of this information and who is listening when we use these devices. I used to talk to my students and, for example, make them think that every time you are writing something in ChatGPT or other systems, it's not private. Again, with the Star Trek example, for those who are there any Trekkies in the room? Yes, thank you so much. But you might remember that in the Next Generation, people can talk on the ship and there was a computer on board and nobody was thinking that the computer was listening to them and that was going to use this information. They were plotting on the ship, they were doing things, because there was a very different, in the 90s, a very different concept of privacy. And we're growing accustomed to think that we have already relinquished that privacy. So that's one of the things that I always try to bring into the conversation. And my second point would be that mathematically, data restriction is erasure. So we tend to think, and this is kind of like counterintuitive, but we tend to think that we need to keep our data, subtract the data from our systems, and from these systems to be trained, because we want to protect. But on the other hand, these systems continue to grow and will continue without us. So we risk being underrepresented or erased by those who are deciding, as well as you presented in your initial statement. And the other thing for me is that illegal is not the same as unethical. And this is a big topic in the narratives about how this is framed about culture against AI. And unfortunately, we can agree that this is unethical, but we're going to have a very, very deep and technical discussion that this is not illegal. And copyright is not technically the best way out of this, because it's an extremely complex framework with extremely bizarre rules. And I'm going to quote Manu. We were talking about this yesterday, and she said something that for me is like super clear. You cannot use a broken tool to fix a broken system. So how can we get out of this and maybe try to think on other policy interventions and go to the root of the problem? Because we want our artists to be represented, we want our artists to be adequately compensated, but we don't want them to be in a fight on 10 years and a 10 years litigation against big tech, who also has a lot of money to continue this fight in the courts in the US. So, and I will close, but this is also a very important thing. The geopolitics of AI are even over the ethics and the governance, because we can debate about the ethics, we can debate about the framework, but the moment that geopolitical considerations go into place, all bets are off. Because in this moment, all of these things are being decided in the US, which we know it is a very critical point, turning point into a fascist regime. So we need to be very, very careful to think that if AI is decided to be of strategic importance in terms of defense, it's not going to matter the ethics, it's not going to matter the copyright frameworks, and all bets are going to be off.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Michaela.
Thank you.
We have 21 minutes and 55 seconds to go for this panel. I'm hoping I can leave maybe 10 minutes at the end for some questions for the audience or comments. I'm from Nigeria. Every time we say ask a question, there's always somebody that says, I don't have a question, it's more of a comment. And then they go on to give their own presentation. So I'll take both.
The TED Talk.
Yeah, I'll take the TED Talk in about 10 minutes. But in that time, I'll maybe ask you both one more question. Who should I start with? Maybe back to you, Jinjun. In Michaela's opening statement, she talked about the risk being loss of income. And you suggested universal basic income, for example, as a way to address that loss of income. But I'd like to hear from you, Jinjun, as an artist yourself. We know that there's definitely that risk of AI making artists unemployed or losing them income. How can we make sure that AI actually puts money or more money in artists' pockets rather than less?
네, 저도 알고 싶긴 한데요.
Find out as well. That is what I want to find out as well. Of course, the traditional industries are undergoing transformative changes, and we really have to admit to that. The AI itself should not be seen as a subject of hostility, and it shouldn't really just be seen as a negative connotation that it is destroying our lives. We have to find a way where we can coexist and co-prosper with AI. And also, we have to understand the fact that there is a new genre of art being created as we speak. In this new era, we're looking at new colors being born into this world. For example, through email, it seems as if artists are actually able to experiment with new toys every single day that could undermine your critical thinking ability, but at least you have very interesting tools at hand. Of course, the colors, they have toxins inside, and depending on how we use the toxins in the color, we can derive great benefits from it, especially when it comes to the issue of income for the artist. That is a very sensitive issue. Now, if you look at the traditional industry involving artists, that is bound to change. So perhaps we can pace ourselves and slow down the pace of development. We need to have certain systems and institutions in place, and at the same time, to moderate the pace of development. And in particular, we have to request, or we have to ask our companies to ensure transparency in the process. The artists' artworks and the data, if they're being used in that process, in the process of collecting relevant data, there has to be a sense of transparency built in, and it has to go back to the artist's income. An artist would have to make that demands very clearly. But of course, companies have their own goals and agendas, and they will want to operate the system in the way they want. And of course, they're not just going to listen to the voices of the artists. And of course, we're depending on technology, but it's really not the issue of AI, but not the technology. It's the people that are behind the technologies. We have to get a buy-in. We have to induce empathy from people. So the critical thinking ability, as well as the basic respect for human rights, we have to actually prove the fact that it is going to serve the benefits and interests of the companies in the end. And of course, then we would have to collaborate with public institutions and to ensure transparency of data. And at the same time, whether it is a company or academia or public institution or the technology itself, it is not a subject of hostility or confrontation, but it is a subject of collaboration to build a better world, a subject of partnership and collaboration. And mostly, very important to maintain our critical thinking and also the symbolic meanings and the connotations that art carries, such as poems, and also the respect for diversity, which is the value of art. That would become a catalyst for expanding the values across the world, and this is something that we need to continue to convince and talk to our companies.
What I'm hearing from you is AI doesn't take away artists' income. It is people who write the rules about how we use AI that will take away people's income. And that's why we must engage in this discussion about governance. So thank you for that. I think we still have time for one more question from me to you, Michaela, before we go to the audience. You mentioned when you were giving your opening remarks about, and I agree with you, about the fact that even if we start getting companies to license AI, it's going to make some shareholders very happy not necessarily the artists or the creators. And so, with that in mind, who should be responsible for making sure that we have the right governance framework? Because clearly, we can't, well, if I understood you, we can't leave it to the big tech companies to self regulate. So, who is it that should make sure we have the right development and usage of AI? In the earlier panel, there was talk about some governments are bad actors. So should it be governments? Who or what combination of actors should be involved in that regulatory
I think
process?
here we can, we don't need to reinvent the wheel every new technology that appears. And it happened with the metaverse, it happened with the internet. We have decades of history of internet governance, so we can look back to that and think of the multi-stakeholder models and see what failed there and how did we end up with this concentration of power and how we can kind of like try to make a different imbalance. And thinking, for example, of the lessons of the metaverse, and we are here in Korea, Seoul, which is home to the Seoul Korea Metaverse, which was a very interesting project. And for me, one take from that era of technology is to think about interoperability and fragmentation, and a technology that is co-constructed and not owned by a single person, which is one of the initial promises of the internet, to be a decentralized network that is going to avoid censorship. And look who we are, how we are here, how we get here. So for me, the answer to your question would be none on their own, but all together. Because we need like these opposite forces. When we talk about the multi-stakeholderism in internet governance, we're talking about civil society, we're talking about academia, we're talking about the private sector, the public sector. And for me, another way to think about this is like two possible futures. Do we want to live in this cyberpunk dystopia where corporations own our thoughts? Because, spoiler alert, this is the next wave that is coming. Interacting through digital devices through neurotechnology. This is the subject of my current investigation, and it's scary. If now we're bad, this is going to get even worse. Or we can think about like more like these solar punk narratives when we are respectful of nature. We co-create with AI. We use the benefits of AI and these technologies for everyone. And that needs to create a system of check and balance to make sure that nobody is able to own the technologies and funnel all the benefits from that. And what I think about is post-scarcity economics. Why are we still tied to this mindset of scarcity that is proper from the physical world when we can replicate everything in digital? And connected to, we need to survive, we need money. So maybe at some point we are not going to see it, but that's where my thoughts connect with universal basic income. If we boil down to the incentives of this technology, why the technology surveil us? Why the technology is taking our attention, our money? So maybe it's time to kind of like step up and try to make a really big structural shift.
Thank you for that. And talking of structural shifts, the previous panel was talking about this idea of really focusing on open source and the idea of open source technology, which I really believe in. Yeah. Although there's a nuance, I think, to open source, because there are lots of open source solutions that are wholly built in the global north. And so they're open source, but they often don't take into account the perspectives and the realities of global south context. And so I definitely believe that we need to move towards more open source, but open source that is built and maintained through a decentralized workforce. And talking of that structural difference, we must start to think about how do we enable open source communities and builders in the global south. I'm on the board of a company called Btrust, and we support open source engineers working on Bitcoin protocol because we found, even as recently as 18 months ago, something like 99%, okay, I'm exaggerating, but a large percentage of open source engineers building the open source Bitcoin protocols were based in the global north, which often then creates a different type of problem, even when we have open source. Anyway, on that note,
Sorry, and then you know how much of that percentage is also male of these engineers?
Oh, yeah. High.
Thank you.
Very high.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great point. We have time for a few questions. Do we have mics in the audience? Yes. Who would like to ask a question or comment? Why don't we take all of them? Let's say maybe 3, and then we can respond at once, and then we'll do our closing statement. So we have one hand here. Bold of me to assume that there are 3 or questions or comments. Okay, there's a hand there. Okay, 2. This side, I was just going to say, this side of the room, what's happening? Okay, there's a hand here. So I think that's, there's 4. Okay, so who has the mic? Let's start from here. Who has the mic on this side? Oh, yes, go for it. Thank you.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just say your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. I'm Maria Afzal. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I work with the Ontario Arts Council, and my question is very much focused around from a funder's perspective. So as an arts council, we have a growing conversation around integrity and ethics around arts works and creations. So from the perspective, from a funder's perspective, in your view, what's the role of public funders in making sure that AI is used in ways that are fair, creative, and respectful of artistic rights? And I've got it's a bit of a two-parter, but with the same framing. I'd love to hear a little bit from the perspective of curation, the works created themselves, and from an angle of funders who are actually processing these applications and looking at fair processes in how do you assess these, keeping in mind that there is now AI tools available and the integrity around how artists are using those for grant-making purposes. So just these 2 elements to the same theme. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 8 minutes and 45 seconds. We're going to have to speed up. There's a gentleman here. Can he have the mic?
Hello, my name is Eduardo from Colombia, and the question is regarding, I would like to double click on the concept of universal basic income, because I find it quite problematic. In my opinion, it could foster the monopoly and the power of the big techs, instead of providing a solution to the workers and to the creators. I mean, in the end, under the techno-feudalism concept from Yanis Varoufakis, I think in the end it's going to be problematic. I think the solution could be more democratizing the means of production and the ways to own the ownership of the technology. So that's my question.
Thank you for that. There was a hand back there and in front here. Unfortunately, that's the only 2 we can take because we are running out of time. So just back there and here in front. Yes, please.
So I'm Kajsa from Sweden. So my question is, what would be the top priority recommendation from you for us to bring with us to when we try to influence national strategy on AI? What would be the top priority? Because this is so complex, and just the top priority. What can't we miss?
Thank you for that. And then the last question here.
Yeah, my name is Arnau. I'm from Spain. And it's a question about ethics. Great presentation, by the way. A super interesting dialogue. You're mentioning why, or my question is, why ethics? Should we use ethics here if we don't use ethics elsewhere? So why ethics and not money, right? If money is, and the current system seems to be focused more on money than in ethics, why should we be different? Is it compatible, this new artificial intelligence that we are developing with our current, let's say, global economic system? So just to be super brief, is it in a context of conflict like the one we have right now and reduced global governance, is it possible that we can strengthen global governance system to manage AI? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm so sorry that we can't take all the questions, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists. I see you were writing, so I'm not going to repeat the questions. To take all of 2 minutes to answer all the questions you wish to answer,
Okay.
and then you do the same. I'm so generous, I know.
You are so bossy.
지금 제가
So I think I really need an AI at this moment, because AI will be able to give me a very good summary of those questions. So in the public sector, from the Ontario Art Council from Canada, you pointed a very valid thing. How can we ensure the public funding, the common funding, and to the creators and artists, how can we protect them whose work is being used by AI? I believe that we really need to underscore the importance of transparency. We cannot really convey a message that AI should be used or should not be used. But the fact that AI has been used and the process that it went through to use data, I think we really need to demand the transparency be built in, because if we're not careful, the funding that is provided by public organizations may actually demotivate or discourage creativity of the artists. So we're not to regulate the use of new technologies, but we just need to focus on the importance of transparency. Now, for the public institutions or public organizations, what should be the priority? That was one of the questions that came from the audience in terms of the priority. I think we really need to go back to the basics. Why are we in the art sector? Why are we doing art? What's the very important criteria that distinguishes people from machines? It is the ability to make art and to appreciate art. It's the diversity that art carries, and exploration about the emotions of humans, and ability to understand the contextual, cultural context of art that really enriches our lives. And going beyond any companies, it brings prosperity to everyone, and it is contributing to that shared prosperity. And I think we really need to focus on this message.
Michaela? I'm going to try to summarize some of the questions. About the first question and how to assess it, just a brief thinking that there's going to be a point, which already are, that we cannot differentiate what this has been created by AI, humans, or in collaboration, like the so-called Turing test for AI. So we shouldn't rely on that toolkit to assess that. To Eduardo's question about techno-feudalism, Varoufakis is one of my favorite philosophers. If you are listening, call me. I want to work with you. So I think for me, it's like universal basic income is one. There is no silver bullet. It's one thing that we can do, but in combination with other policies. There is a philosopher that wrote about limitarianism. It's like putting a cap on wealth, which is a very interesting concept. But for me, it boils down to disarm the economic incentives of where our current stage of capitalism, call it cloud capital as Varoufakis does, or other types of capitalism, is going. And this goes against to your question about if this is compatible with our economic system at the moment. No, because we have this imbalance in power, and we have to have policy interventions. And at this moment, the states are the only one that can be like the power to contrast the imbalance of power. And we have like just 1 minute. And about the top priority recommendation, this is like a quote from my grandmother, but she used to say, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So look under the hood. When someone is like talking, go to the goals, the ultimate motivation, because coming from the copyright sector, I know that there is like good intentions here, but it ends up being like bad things for the artists who are locked down of their artworks and who are expoliated. So sometimes it's just that copyright might not be your friend. And thank you.
Thank you so much. As we close this conversation, I want us to remember these maybe 4 things or 5 things. The first thing I want to leave you with from the conversation we've had is AI is not coming. It's already here. It's shaping how our stories are told, who sees our stories, and who benefits from them. So whether you're an artist, a cultural policymaker, or simply somebody who cares about culture, now is the moment to get involved. We mustn't wait for others to set the rules. We must educate ourselves. We must advocate really loudly for fairness, for inclusion, for ethical AI, and most importantly, so that the cultural and creative sector can claim its place at this table. We must remember that AI can amplify our creativity, it can protect our cultural diversity, it can ensure fair compensation for creatives, but only if we step up and shape the future that we want to see. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us not be caught sleeping on a bicycle. We need to make sure that we are riding the bicycle. Thank you very much. You've been an amazing audience.
Are you gonna stand there?
I'm going to stand, but just only, I'm going to come and sit down.
Oh,
Do you
okay.
want me to sit here with you guys?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. Test, test. Test. Can you hear me? Do I need it? No. Okay.
We are waiting on Magdalena.
Um?
We will wait on Magdalena.
No.
Oh.
What did you say, Cecil? No. Let's rather bright.
I don't see.
Morning, everybody. Hi.
Let's settle down.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Rowland, and I'm the co-founder of Arts Equator. We're an organization that's based in Southeast Asia. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. This is my fourth World Summit, and it's been quite an experience to bring it back to Asia for me personally. We are actually about to start the third plenary, and we stand between you and lunch, so we will try to be efficient with our time so that we're not running late. I have with me for the third plenary, which the title of which is The Rights and Responsibilities of Culture for a Sustainable Future. And in this panel, we'll learn about the legal international instruments that have a potential, and let's keep that word potential in mind, to advance the rights of artists and indigenous knowledge within the cultural and arts sector. So we'll hear from our two speakers about the framing of these legal instruments, how they can work, but also the limitations and gaps within each. On stage with me, it's been an absolute pleasure over the past couple of days to get to know both of my speakers. We have two distinguished speakers, which I will, in the interest of time, introduce very briefly. Their full bios with their many accomplishments are available on the Ithaca website, so please do avail yourself of them. Ms. Cicely Jacobs is the chairperson of the National Arts Council of Namibia and a specialist in intellectual property law. Ms. Jacobs has worked as a UN UNESCO national expert, contributing to the revisions of copyright legislation, and served as a technical expert for the National Arts Fund Draft Bill and Regulations of 2024. Solamale Malo Dr. Hayen Tualima is senior law lecturer at Victoria University of Wellington, and she's an expert in traditional knowledge and intellectual property in the Pacific. And in 2023, if I may refer to you as Hayen, Hayen led the Pacific country negotiations on the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Traditional Knowledge. So we'll start very quickly. Cicely, you ready?
Sure.
So you've worked on issues related to social protection for and rights for artists and cultural workers, including fair working conditions, remunerations, and recognition for the work and the labor that they do, as well as intellectual property. Can you maybe take us a little bit into the legal protections that exist and some of the benefits, as well as the challenges as they apply to the kind of unique features that the arts and culture sector have?
Very well. Good afternoon. Culture is a right. Culture is labor. Culture is our shared responsibility. It is both a sector of sustaining livelihoods and also dimensions of development such as identity, community, economy, and sovereignty. Or is it so? Is it like that? Are we experiencing it like that? And so when we seek sustainable futures, we must move away from just simply protecting the cultural rights, but structurally enabling them. We must legally, economically, and digitally protect, but implement. Implementation and strategic planning has been lacking in the CCI sector, particularly around labor rights, which is an indictment on most of us sitting here because this is a conversation we've been having for many, many years. And the fact that this has not taken place, whether it's in the global north or global south, is an indictment on us. We are sitting in the future here in South Korea. This is the sustainable future we are trying to chart. And so this should be a lesson learned. Now, given that culture and arts exist beyond heritage and creativity, but that it is work, it is intellectual property, and it is living knowledge, I must ask the question, and if we are seeking who holds the rights to culture, we must answer artists, communities, cultural practitioners, living knowledge carriers, traditional knowledge carriers, and definitely our future generations. And so I am implored to start with labor rights. In many instances for our countries, we have ratified UNESCO and ILO, this is the International Relations Labor Organization conventions, and ratified them locally. And yet, almost in every industry, these labor laws were enacted, minimum standards were put in place, but for the CCIs, this is still an issue. There is no fair remuneration, minimum standards, access to public health schemes, maternity leave benefits, or even loan schemes. And so I get really concerned with this because there is a persistent and pernicious use of the state as this description of the industry as precarious. While this is practically true, it cannot continue to be the reason why you definitionally exclude the workers in this industry. And I would also argue that because of these ratifications that have been made locally, that apply almost always to other industries, it does not apply to the CCIs because of this other thing called collective bargaining. So there, in this instance, there is a shared responsibility between the state and the sectors or any specific industry. And in that instance, it means that the artists, the cultural practitioners, and communities with living knowledge must organize themselves. Now, I would argue, certainly, in many examples, that even in my own country, for example, the Labor Act of 2007 was initially drafted and enacted and is applicable and implemented really well, but does not apply to the CCIs. And it did not need any industry to move for collective bargaining or to push trade unions. So there are two models of creating laws, labor laws. It is a state responsibility initially to push it, to provide the initial minimum protection. Then, of course, there is the other shared responsibility by the very industry to then collectively bargain through unions and organizing. Now, we have seen a great example recently of the Writers Guild organization in the US that also used striking as a method of pushing for minimum standards and for writers' royalty payments, particularly around AI-generated content now, and which was quite successful in 2003. There are many other examples. But talking about fair remunerative systems, South Korea is a good example. In 2012, they had the artist certification system in place and put it into the law. And this is an access way for artists to become recognized as professionals. There is approving methods, and it's quite simple. It can be an example. And through this system, artists are able to even get insurance, employment injury insurance, loan schemes, emergency benefits, for example. We just experienced the pandemic. And so this is a really good example of a system that works. Talking about fair remunerative systems, intellectual property is a big issue. In today's digital world, the big platforms have become sort of the cultural stage on which artists are performing, basically. But unlike in the analog world, the artists are not getting the tickets payment, basically. And so while these platforms are making billions of dollars from ad revenues, from data mining, selling our own personal data, subscription fees, and so on, many artists, if you're not particularly famous, do not receive copyright royalty payments, if any, and mostly it's negligible. So where platforms are not digitized or monetized in some countries like my own, this payment does not exist at all, even though the streaming is taking place. So from an analog representation, even on radio, if your song plays, you get paid. And so technically, currently, a lot of, whether it's monetized or not, there is copyright infringement taking place through these big platforms. Copyright, whenever a song is played or content is streamed, money is owed, definitely. And so YouTube, for example, only pays $1 US dollar per 1,000 stream. Spotify is a little bit better. It's around $4 per 1,000 stream. So imagine you have to reach 1,000 to get any sort of even the smallest of amount. So this already highlights the very challenges from a protection that exists automatically, and yet it is not being enforced, implemented by our intellectual property authorities and also our collective management organizations. How can we, as these sort of councils and cultural agencies, incentivize and push for that sort of thing to take place? These figures are showing that there is no way beyond just the labor rights that there is a sustainable income and livelihood for the artists. And so last but not least, because we cannot speak about all the rights, but just the critical ones at this moment, we need to talk about access to resources. To be activated, cultural rights have to be, resources have to be available, from funding to infrastructure, visibility, mobility, a bigger issue also that we are currently facing. And so if a poet who is sitting in a rural community cannot access internet, they cannot upload their content. For example, we have a lot of issues, particularly with the global north, around immigration. And so mobility is very strenuous for the artist to apply and go through these processes. And yet, on the other side of things, global south is a little bit more open. And so this is also something for us as a global community to consider how much artists have freedom to actually move around, to participate in global markets and even conversations and exhibitions like this. And so I will leave it at that. I think that is sufficient for now with the details of all the laws.
Great. So I'm just going to maybe, just before I hand over to Hayun, just kind of maybe pick up on a couple of points that maybe we can try and remember. Maybe we can think about some of the ideological issues that has excluded the artists when governments have been thinking about labor and labor laws, number one. Why some of the traditional tools that have been used by other sectors, for example, striking, collective bargaining, haven't really been used by artists. And maybe let's kind of, maybe we can pick up those two things a little bit later. Hayun, I hand over to you.
Tala Falava, and good morning. My name is Solomon Malo, my chiefly title from my mother's village in Faleula, Samoa. And my birth name is Haiyan, a nod to my Chinese heritage, and then Tualima being my surname from my father. I'd also like to acknowledge my villages in Samoa, Faleula, I've already mentioned, Lepea and Upolu, and Salalonga, Popua, and Papsakawa and Savai. So before I actually start my intervention, I want to say at the outset that Indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, heritage, intellectual property, which, as you've heard from Cecily, looks at copyright or patents, different areas. What's important to really think about is that culture permeates all of these concepts. And art is also a form of expression of these different concepts. Now, before I actually look at my intervention, the other thing I also want to say is situate myself in terms of the subject matter of intellectual property, traditional knowledge, and customary law. Now, Kathy has mentioned that in 2023, I was the lead negotiator for the Pacific Island Forum member states in the Treaty on WIPO, but also, more importantly, these issues of Indigenous knowledge or customary knowledge are very important to me as a Samoan woman, having grown up around this in my village, in my family, and my church. And wherever I go and move, the umbilical cord is still connected to my motherland. So I just wanted to say this to preface where I come from this, not only as a professional, but on a personal level. Now, in terms of a framework to think about these issues. Now, colonization, if you like, really was about the acquisition of power and resources. So the question I pose there is, what was the impact of that in terms of Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge or community knowledge? And then if you look at decolonization, that was about recognition of state sovereignty and about governance. What was the impact of that on Indigenous knowledge? Now, I want you to keep that in mind as I talk about the WIPO Treaty and some of the work that I've done there. So, as I said, I've been fortunate to be able to see WIPO's work from the inside as a WIPO Indigenous Fellow from 2015 to 2017 and been involved in these negotiations for quite a while now. And so in terms of a brief background of WIPO, WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, is the UN organization that specializes in intellectual property. So since 2000, the WIPO IGC has been focusing on text-based negotiations for the protection of traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources associated with traditional knowledge. So, member states from around the world have participated in these negotiations, and historically, after 25 years of negotiations, WIPO came up with the Treaty on Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge. So in May last year, 141 member states from WIPO signed up to this treaty. However, it requires 15 member states to lodge their international instrument for ratification or acceding to the treaty. Now, at present, the only country in the world that has lodged its instrument of ratification is Malawi. Now, other countries are in the process of looking at ratifying. So what is the significance of the treaty? How does it impact Indigenous knowledge? Now, the treaty establishes a mandatory disclosure requirement. And you're thinking, what does that mean? The other thing to keep in mind is that it focuses on the efficacy of patents. So a classic example of patents would be your phones, right? So in terms of the disclosure requirement, an example of this would be use of bush foods, right? So if we were to apply the disclosure requirement, what it would require is that if you try to patent a bush food, you would have, the patent applicant would have to disclose the origin or source of the plant and or the Indigenous peoples or local communities. Where neither of these things are known to you, the patent applicant must sign a declaration to state that this is so. Now, what's interesting about this is, of course, the patent examiner will help you with filling out your application, but the patent examiner, there's no onus on the patent examiner to determine whether this is a genuine disclosure. So I asked the question at the beginning, what is the impact of the institutions or the concepts that were there from colonization and decolonization on Indigenous knowledge? And we have now the WIPO Treaty. So some demandeurs and Indigenous peoples and local communities would argue that mandatory disclosure will protect and preserve Indigenous knowledge. Others, on the other hand, are more critical and say that in fact it will facilitate the misuse and misappropriation of Indigenous knowledge. And if you're lost and you're thinking, what does this all mean? Indigenous knowledge arguably has culture permeating through it. What we have here is a patent disclosure requirement on genetic resources associated with traditional knowledge. So what I also want to say at this juncture is that the WIPO Treaty is not a full guarantee of Indigenous rights. However, it is a gateway instrument that has the potential to recognise Indigenous rights and protect the knowledge that is associated with these rights. Thank you.
My job is really easy after that. Thanks, Hayan. Maybe I'll pick up on a couple of things that you talked about. When you were talking about the fact that this treaty has been signed, and with respect to the different indigenous communities across the world and their experiences with imperialism. So I know that, for example, the Ibi have had a different experience. The Orang Asli and the Orang Sulta in Malaysia and Indonesia and Singapore have had different experiences. But when I first read about this and I was doing some research about this, I thought, why would anyone from any indigenous community sign anything with the word treaty on it, given the historical context of treaties? But I think because of your insider and outsider experience, you're both a member of the community, deeply embedded, but you're also an expert. You've done your PhD, and part of your PhD was deep, really embodied conversations with communities that would have been affected by this. So I really appreciate the fact that you've both kind of sketched the potential of this, but also I think highlighted some issues, some of which are about knowledge, and we think about Foucault and knowledge and power, as well as you're placing it as an entry point, but as the start of a process rather than a culmination of something, right? And maybe we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the steps that artists and the community can take. But I wanted to maybe bring in a little bit of when you, and Cicely, we've had this conversation as well about how some of the legal instruments that we have inherited and we use and we continue to use as strategies to build space and to build equity and to give us a platform for our voices are still deeply structured and embedded into a kind of knowledge system that is perhaps at odds with the communities or the work that we're representing. And maybe, Hayan, I'll maybe ask you to explain to us why, for example, this treaty links specifically genetic, why this point on genetics when we talk about indigenous knowledge, which, as I understand it, is something that is much more integrated and holistic, which involves spirituality and custodianship. Why has that been pulled out? And Cicely, if you will also, please feel free.
Okay. From an intellectual property perspective, it's interesting because I was having the conversation with her in the sense of the name of the treaty itself is problematic. So it's WIPO Treaty of Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Associated Traditional Knowledge. The point around that whole negotiation was about protecting the traditional knowledge. Now, technically, under the patents law, whether it's local or even international, whether it's the Patent Treaty, Paris Convention, or even the TRIPS Agreement, they exclude from patentability genetic resources. You cannot patent. There's no novelty in something that is pure, that comes from the ground or any other sort of biological matter. And so the associated traditional knowledge point is what I find problematic with, because it implies that it is not that which is being really protected, it is this genetic resource. Now, the problem that has occurred here is that through this treaty, it will allow for particularly pharmaceutical companies and many other corporations that have used the patent system in the past when they went to most of these traditional communities to find out from traditional knowledge carriers the traditional medicine part of it. This was actually my LLM thesis on patents of traditional medicine. And so now that we had found out about the associated knowledge, traditional knowledge, it was becoming obvious that you cannot get away with the fact of patenting something of that nature. And so this is just another gateway to continue that practice, and yet without providing the sort of access benefit sharing and the processes that you spoke about that are necessary. There will be so many challenges around the community. With whom do you negotiate? Who will be the traditional authority to take care of whatever benefits are coming from such agreements? How do you distribute them? And so there are many issues I have with that. So patentability is another excuse that uses the intellectual property system that is inappropriate, quite frankly, in a knowledge system that is not fitted for the framework. So I will let you continue on that question specifically, and then we can come back to some of the things you asked me.
In terms of wide genetic resources, and as I said, for WIPO, the WIPO IGC, these negotiations took 25 years. In terms of the politics around this, you can only imagine. Now, patents make a lot of money. And so for developing states, there was a reluctance to have recognition of these rights. For the least developing states, they were more of wanting some form of protection. And so it's been a political thing. And if you look at the instrument that's passed, in terms of disclosure, a patent, a traditional patent requires disclosure in the application. Now, in terms of the possible, what this has set, it actually, the distinction is that you have to disclose the origin or source and actually acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and local communities. So, as I said, it was a middle ground instrument. So it's actually very political why this happened. And for Indigenous peoples and local communities, it's a win. Because this, you know, there have been people who have been fighting this, not only in the world intellectual property space, but recognition of Indigenous rights in other spaces, and the meaning of things such as culture, recognition of creative works of Indigenous communities. So to put it simply, it's a political thing as well. And if I may segue a little bit, if that's okay, Kathy, into thinking about these, the conversations that need to happen before you're thinking accession or ratification of these things. And I've had these conversations.
Can I interrupt to ask you, can you explain for those of us, primarily me, the difference between the signing of the treaty and then the ratification process very quickly?
It's intention of the member states that there will be, the treaty will come into force and you will implement it at the national level, is pretty much what it's doing there. But I think it's important, like, if you are wanting the cultural mandate to be a part of these conversations, is to actually ask yourselves, what is your objective? What is your mandate? And quite often at these negotiations, from my experience, is that it's often been the intellectual property ministry, and where relevant at times, the Ministry of Environment. Now, in an ideal world, from my experience, what you would actually have is a full set. So you would have, by this, with all due respect, I mean Ministry of Intellectual Property, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Culture, and other relevant agencies. And I know for cost reasons, limited resources, you can't get everybody at the table. But it's really important at the national level to find coordination and synergy. Because quite often these issues, as we've seen in the last couple of days, they seem to exist in silos. And there's actually a lot of benefit to be had working together and creating a point of synergy, focusing on commonality and having an appreciation of distinction.
Yeah. So the ratification process is actually one point of intervention where actually national governments and community leaders, stakeholders can actually, if they come together and they are coordinated in some way, it's a place of opportunity, right?
Yes.
For the cultural power brokers, for example, who will be here or who who hold these mandates to actually involve themselves in it. And from what you're saying, there have been, when we spoke, you were saying that there are some countries that have been at this game much longer and have approached these negotiations from exactly these positions of power, right? So aside from, what you're saying is that actually what's been missing to some extent is a whole community, whole government, whole stakeholder approach to it.
Yes.
Right. And Cicely, that also kind of ties a little bit to some of the things that you've talked about in terms of, for example, a piecemeal approach to labor, but also implementation, right? And I was thinking when you spoke about, when you were talking about the fact that artists were not included initially, the cultural sector was not included, it reminded me so much of the idea of the labor that women put in, right? Right. So the idea of the labor of in the home, child rearing, for example, these are not recognized as things that need to be recognized as labor or remuneration. And sometimes the conversation is very similar. You're an artist because it's your vocation. You're an artist because you have to. It's who you are. It's completely linked to your personality. We don't expect that of an engineer. And it's also the way that gender and women are so linked to parenthood, right? But maybe kind of using that and kind of some of the things that you've been working on. Can you tell us some of the steps that you feel or the advocacies that you've done to kind of redress this?
Very well. I suppose the question of stakeholder involvement is very important. The sort of juxtaposition, though, between the women's rights movement in labor and then also, I suppose, for the sector itself. But fundamentally, your question is about the value system, right? So it's the perception that the artists and the cultural practitioners have been held with in communities, just generally. So that is where it comes from. It's the same thing if you would take it back then to the analogy of the woman. And so we value art, in fact, the crafts, the content, more than the artists.
Yeah, that's so true.
So there is fundamentally then that tension in the value system. And so for that reason, initially, these exclusions exist. And so part of the conversation has to be, how do we heal that, to use a spiritual word rather? So how can you as stakeholders then come together in the CCIs to address that very issue? Now, artists and cultural practitioners are not administratively inclined, generally, not to be disparaging. And again, the perception that they are doing it as a hobby or it's a volunteer for society's well-being and entertainment, but themselves not given that level of status. So given those two things, organizing artists and cultural practitioners has continued to be very challenging, even for my own work. We have, through the National Arts Council, done a few technical meetings with ILO on the future of the arts and the cultural entertainment sector. And every time we have such information, we go back to Namibia and we have stakeholder meetings, and I've done in-depth presentations, taking artists through exactly what it means to organize. Now, this is a voluntary thing in any country, typically, because it's a constitutional matter. You have the freedom of association. And so one cannot force people, but you need a certain amount to carry the voice enough to make the push for actually having power in collective bargaining. And so this is now initially the issue. And so this is why I continue to both argue for, yes, organize, advocate for it, but then for the state to also step in. Because if we are to see the artists this way fundamentally, then we must then take care of them too. And so therefore it becomes the state responsibility to initially provide minimum. And then eventually, as the process continues and the artist is empowered, they themselves can push for more through these sort of strikes and picketing and so on, which was, as we all know now, so particularly successful recently with the Writers Guild, because why? Hollywood stood still. And we also saw it was in 2023 that in 2024 the production quality and even content was lacking. And so that in itself tells you already the power that they have in fact, moving the conversation. And so they were also concerned, obviously, around the AI-generated content and whether writers will be displaced. And this is a bigger conversation around copyright itself, too. Does AI, or does it have the potential of eroding copyright and the originality requirement? So if you can create something using someone's style or just extract directly from generative AI, what does that mean for copyright and subsistence? And what is that work? Do we need a new process or a system or framework to look at this? Furthermore, there is the issue of, is it an exception? Is it a limitation? So there are, to this exclusive right and copyright that you have as an artist or author, you have, there are limitations to all rights. And so there is, whether it's fair use in some countries or fair dealing, this provision is typically given to academia, critical review, journalists, and so on, so that you can extract certain amount of work of someone to make a point or to study. But you can't take substantial amount, which is what AI does. So you can, and without the consent, because by the way, that exception still exists with consent and compensation. And so without this consent, without this compensation, so is it an exception? Because it looks like something that it's just a large language model that is gathering data, but it's gathering copyrighted data. And so there is this issue too. So these are all concerns around which not only trade unions, collective bargaining can work, but to use our platforms and our institutions around collective management and the actual collection and then the distribution. But they themselves have infrastructural funding, digital access issues too. And so how can we incentivize these spaces that are representing our artists, or ought to in many ways, to actually enforce the law and implement it?
Right. So it feels as if it's first a question of information and being kind of aware of our rights as artists, but also then understanding the frameworks. But capacity building, but also not just. I'm thinking. So I come from an arts management background, right? So I don't make art at all, but my job is to, support artists. And I've seen in the kind of work that I've been doing that, in fact, it's the diversification of the ecosystem that you have, not then just working with the artists and trying to kind of get them to understand these things, but actually having kind of cultural administrators, cultural workers that have a different set of skills come into that space. And I'm just wondering, are there efforts, within your government, within your context, to build or to train these kinds of individuals?
Certainly. In fact, the National Arts Council of Namibia has a very dedicated bursary program, and it's not just for university, but also for technical TVET, because our strategy has been around creating the secondary ecosystem of the value chain in the market. So the artist is there, but how do you manage, administer, get it to production, marketing? All these other systems must be in place. And so our priority areas have been looking at exactly this sort of thing, so that there is capacity building. Of course, we have also worked and are continuing to work with institutions like Basecamp, so that they can provide capacity building. This is typically from a creative entrepreneurial skills development. And because artists have to actually write project plans and manage them and even come up with budgets. And so how do you actually do this? And so we've been very much involved in that work. We have consistently decentralized advocacy, just to how to apply for grants and bursaries, mobility funding, all the sort of resources that are accessible to them. And recently we launched the Namibian Arts, Heritage and Culture Policy that will be running till 2030. And there is a lot of commitment from the government, which is also calling on to the state and other stakeholders, rather, particularly private and NGOs and such, to look at the artists from both the human and social and economic dimensions of development.
Thank you. Hi, and maybe I'll, because we're running out of time, and I do want to open the floor to for some questions. Maybe I'll kind of, end with you just to ask you, when you talk about WIPO, it feels very clearly that it's not the endpoint, right? It's not the resolution to kind of decades of kind of diminishing extraction, kind of exploitation, but actually it's the start of a process. As you've said, it's the gateway to something. And although you've alluded to and you've spoken to the complexities of the issues and the power structures within it, but I was really interested when you said that there are some there's some kind of structures built into it for interventions and so on. So my question, I guess, to you is, how do artists and cultural workers and community leaders and and makers of art, how do we start from a position of power when we're negotiating with these kinds of treaties within our regional as well as our national level, to make this kind of incremental improvements? So who needs to be in the room first, but also what kind of work needs to have been done before whoever it is who has the privilege to be in the room gets in the room?
Thank you, Kathy. I think at the outset it's important to say that that question is layered and have these many considerations to look at it. But I think firstly it's important for the artists and knowledge holders to be quite clear of what their needs and expectations are. And it's also important to take these and to be able to advocate for the recognition of your rights at the national level and cultural policy and policy that's related to intellectual property and of course the legislation that's relevant to that. And then of course being able to negotiate the recognition of this within the national level to take it to the table at international negotiations. So I think it's important to, one, needs and expectations. What are they? Secondly, advocate for those. And I think it's also important that there is an understanding that there are some deeply neo-colonial institutions and criteria that can sometimes be quite difficult. So then comes the question of whose capacity should we be building? And I say that because sometimes when we are employing neo-colonial institutions, we say that the arts practitioner or knowledge holder needs to build capacity. Now, is that the capacity we should be building, or should it be the other way around? And that's something to consider as well at the national level. And it's finding that middle ground and being able to create spaces for everybody at the table.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. Yes. Wait for the mic.
I won't shout.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. This was really a fascinating discussion and very interesting for me and all of us. I find it fascinating that in this panel and also in the previous panel, the human rights standards just don't seem to come into play. And this, I think, reflects very much the fragmentation that we have been talking about between systems and regimes. So WIPO is, and the states that attend WIPO are under the obligation, legal binding obligation, to respect Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that says that there should be benefits. States are under the obligation to respect free, prior and informed consent of indigenous peoples, not only in the corridors of the UN, in the corridors of WIPO, in the corridors of the ILO, and even more importantly, in the indigenous reservations and before artists. So I think that what, at least, what I have seen and my mandate has seen is that really, we should try to insist that these systems are brought together. And when we talk about WIPO, WIPO implements the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And when we talk about, the state practice, the states implement Article 15, and also community of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And when we talk about AI, the human rights approach is there. And I'm not even talking about cultural rights approach anymore. And if it's not there, well, let's just go to the treaty bodies. So there are tools, but the tools are multi-layered. And I think that one of the mistakes that we all make, one of the mistakes that my mandate makes as well, is that we are not aware of all the layers and all the systems, and we forget to bring them all together. And finally, I so agree with you. Actually, the capacity building should not be focused on the indigenous communities. The capacity building should be on WIPO and UNESCO and the United Nations, and to decolonize them and to make sure that they develop. Thank you. And I think the clapping goes to you because you said it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Over there first. Thank you.
Is it on? Yes. Bulavinaka. My name is Francis Vakauta, and I'm from the Pacific community. Thank you for the conversation. It's wonderful to see these issues around Indigenous and traditional knowledge taking center stage at Ithaca this year. And so this is a call to action for our end of convening outcomes that will be presented to Mondia Court. And we thank Hayung and Sisley, I think it is. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, for the wonderful conversation. But also just wanting to flag that while we do currently have the WIPO Treaty for Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge, we also need to acknowledge that it's been 25 years for ongoing conversations for the two core treaties that are nowhere near resolution for the protection of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions, which have wide-reaching implications for all cultural producers and artists. And I feel that this needs to be emphasized in our interventions at Mondia Court, that there needs to be a global call if we are interested in, and I guess, furthering the dialogue around a standalone goal. This needs to be a fundamental dimension, not just for our indigenous peoples, but for all artists. When we talk about the 1980 status and rights of artists, we haven't really seen that leverage. We've heard a lot of rhetoric, but we're not seeing the political will. We're not seeing the policy change. We're not seeing legislature. And so it feels like one step forward, 10 steps back. 25 years is a very long time to wait. In the meantime, our people all over the world, indigenous cultural communities and creative communities continuously being exploited, AI being the most recent tool, and we know that's just being expounded daily. So my humble call from the Pacific to the rest of our global community represented here is if we could make a strong position or statement in an outcomes that goes to Mondia Court, and for those of us who will be attending Mondia Court, to please continue to push this agenda, because it rests at the very core of our creativity and survival of art as we know it today. Vinaka.
Thank you, Francis, for the intervention. I think it's really important because you've put it on the record. Number one, and is that a call to collective action that I hear? So we have time for one more question, if there is. I thought there was one more. Any closing remarks from either of you? Would you like to?
I just wanted to say that whatever regimes are adopted, it's important to include the knowledge holders and the communities where this knowledge is situated. It's important to have them as part of the conversation, talking with them and asking them what their expectations are. Because quite often we talk about the knowledge holders and how we should protect knowledge or preserve knowledge. It's really important to go to the grassroots and do that work and ask them. And secondly, I also wanted to thank my esteemed colleagues here who have had the great opportunity to be able to work with Cecily and Kathy. It's been a pleasure to be able to have these discussions with you. And lastly, I'd like to thank IFCA and ARTCO for facilitating my participation, and a shout out to the Pacific who are here at IFCA, and I'm sure we'll get more in the future. So go the Pacific. Whakaite lava.
Well, thank you very much. This was quite fascinating for me. And yes, I would like to just reiterate the point of this here. South Korea is a lesson to be learned, and I'm particularly pleased that Mr. Chong had really lobbied for this to happen here. So we have so much to learn from South Korea. But I just want to also remind us that rights and responsibilities cannot just be papers that we have and then we sit and speak about. They have to be implemented. So I appreciate the call to action, particularly for Monte Account, where there will be state and governmental actors. These are not technical issues as much as they sound so. They are structural barriers that directly contradict the promise of cultural rights. So thank you very much, everybody, and IFCA for having me here.
Thank you. So I'll just, 2 seconds, Magdalena. 2 seconds. Just to kind of round up, I think some of the things, the big themes that have come up from this session is that while there are international structures and legal frameworks that can actually advance the rights of cultural rights and cultural workers, we have to approach it with a certain kind of cynicism, or not cynicism, but suspicion, to understand what are some of the embedded structures that are in them that perhaps will impede actual equity, number one, and that number two, talking to all stakeholders and working together in a cross-sector way. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Please,
you.
a round of applause for our second panel.